There's a man named Dr. George Elder, and he used to attend a church I served. He was at one time the head of the religion department at Hunter College in New York City. But he had an interesting journey to becoming a religious professor of religion. He was raised in the Appalachian Mountains in a family of snake handlers, and in a church where he was told that if you told this mountain to move, it would move, literally. And they believed everything very literally. So at the age of 8, he sat in his window and he looked at the yonder mountain and he willed it to move, and it didn't move. And he lost his faith at the age of 8 because he had an advanced intellect, certainly for that community. And so he went on to join the Peace Corps, became a Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand, became a Buddhist, learned Buddhist meditation, and in the middle of his Buddhist meditation practice, it suddenly dawned on him, there's more than one kind of mountain, and there's more than one way that it can be moved. Jesus said, if you tell the mountain, pick yourself up and throw yourself in the sea, and you truly believe and do not doubt, the mountain will move. For all things whatsoever you ask for in prayer, believe that you've already received them and you will. But we have to hold this flexibly. And we've got to know what a mountain is and how it moves. In his case, he realized it wasn't literal. But faith is something very important to us. We have needs. We've got to get them met. What are we going to do with them? You know, there was I want everybody in this church to pull out a penny. And if you don't have a penny, I got one for you. So check to see if you have a penny. If your neighbor doesn't have one penny, hand them one penny. And if you still don't have a penny, I got a bunch. So check it out. So if you don't have a penny, raise your hand. All right. If you don't have a penny, I will give you a penny. If you don't have a penny, raise your hand. Got a couple of people here who want a penny. Okay, we got 3 here. Pass it down. We got a couple here. All right. And while this is going on, just pass it down. Now, while we do this, I want you to think about the penny that you're holding. Anybody else need a penny? I want you to think about the penny that you're holding, and I want to tell you a little story. There was a gentleman who used to walk around Unity Village back, 1920s, 1930s, in the days when it was called Unity Farm. And he was part of the first circle that would sit there with Charles Fillmore and hold in prayer and visualization the building of this now Unity Village, then Unity Farm. And he said what happened was that Charles Fillmore took out a penny. Actually, he asked, does anybody have a penny? And this man pulled out the penny. That's what happened. And Charles Fillmore said, okay, now I want you to hold it in your hands and let's bless the penny. Because this will be the starting point from which we're going to build Unity Farm, Unity Village. Charles Fillmore, years later, had passed on. This man had gone on to retire from his job. And he spent his hours each day as a retiree walking around Unity Village with a penny in his hand, the original penny. It was an Indian head penny. And he'd walk up to people and he'd say, this whole place was built for a penny. It all started with a penny. Now it sounds like a warm-hearted story, but the truth is that every opening to God in the universe is equal. Eric Butterworth once said there's as much spiritual substance in a penny as there is in $1 million. I mean, I prefer the $1 million, but there's as much substance. There's an aperture through which spiritual substance, the substance of God, can pour in a penny as $1 million. But what is your penny? Where do you hold your faith? What is it that you're holding in your consciousness? For them, it was that literal penny. I've shared before about Eric Butterworth when he was in the Depression, the Great Depression, and how his family was living in Long Beach, California. He was an 8-year-old. His mother was a Unity minister in the Long Beach church, but his father was a gambling addict and would travel around the country gambling, and the family was destitute as a result of it. So here they were in the Great Depression, and the mother was having a hard time just keeping them fed. Well, what was she going to do to take care of their housing? What was she going to do to take care of their education? So she came up with a divine idea that came to her in prayer, and that was to go to the county records and find mansions in the very, very wealthy section of Long Beach that were abandoned in the Depression, that didn't have anyone living in it. Find out the owner of record, go to the owner of record and say to them, we will take care of your home. The grounds will take care of the interior, we'll keep it up beautifully in exchange for free rent. And of course, these homes were always in the wealthiest and best schooled neighborhoods in town, so the kids got great education. But there was one time that things really had taken a difficult turn, and they did not have sufficient food on the table, and there was nothing for dinner. And he listened to his mother, he'd listened to these teachings, he understood them in his 8-year-old level, and he said to his mother, I know we have a few pennies in the house. And they took their pennies and they put them in a basket. And he said, okay, now let's make a circle. So he and his family got together and they made a circle. And he says, okay, now what we're going to do is bless the pennies, throw them up in the air. They're going to go up into the air and gather spiritual substance from God. And when they come back down, they'll be multiplied. And his mother said, sure, let's do that. So they said a little prayer, very playful. You know, it's the playful attitude of detachment that gets the results. Jesus said, if you become like a child, you can enter the kingdom, which is the kingdom of increase. Anyway, they're holding the basket. They say the prayer. They throw it up in the air. They catch the pennies, and the doorbell rings. The neighbor next door, who was quite wealthy, was having a party. And not enough people showed up for the party, but they had plenty of food, and she remembered the family next door, so she had sent all of her servants over with silver tureens full of food. And they feasted that night. And he lived out of that vision for the rest of his life and built his great work. What is your penny? What is your magic penny? Where, what was that bad joke? I like my bad jokes. A man in deep meditation heard the voice of God saying, $1 million to you is like a penny to me. 1,000,000 years to you is like a second to me. And he thought for a second. He said, can I have one of your pennies? And he heard, just a second. Okay, that's all I'm saying. So there is as much spiritual substance in a penny. What is your penny? Where are you holding your faith? What does it take to activate this? Jesus said, if you have faith the size of a grain of mustard. Well, he might as well have said, if you had a faith the size of a penny. He was talking about something small. I was reading once a person critiquing the Bible and saying that it was a worthless document because, after all, Jesus said that the mustard seed was the smallest of all seeds, and we all know that it's not the smallest. There are smaller seeds. Well, it's a metaphor. Deal with it. But he could have used the metaphor of the penny. And look at this penny. Think about it. We're going to, at the end of my talk, bless our pennies. It's not because it's a physical thing that really makes the difference, and it's not because it has to do with material answer. It has to do with what is your penny. And you need a focus. You need an aperture through which your prayer can operate. Sometimes the thing that gets you to operate on the level of faith, to open up your faith, to get that aperture open, is extremity. They say human extremity is God's opportunity. And I had an opportunity to experience that back in 1972 when I was hitchhiking cross country. It was 105 degrees. I was in San Marcos, Texas. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. And they let me out on this cloverleaf interchange where there was nothing there besides just fields. And I was so weak and so dehydrated and so hungry, and I hadn't slept the night before, that I felt like I was going to pass out or get sick. So I had a backpack, and I looked for a place to hide it. Because I knew I could. I saw Howard Johnson's about 2 blocks away that I could get something to eat, and I thought to myself, no, I'm not going to make it with this backpack. I just knew it. So I set the backpack down next to a light pole. It was exposed out in the open, but it was the best I could do. And I slowly walked, sweating, to that Howard Johnson's. And I sat down, drank 5 ice water glasses in a row very quickly, then ordered a fried chicken dinner And in the middle of eating my first bite, I knew from the tip of my head to the tip of my toes that my backpack was being stolen. I knew it. And there was nothing I could do about it. It was my extremity. I couldn't rush up and run 2 blocks away, even if I wanted to. I didn't have the strength. There was nothing I could do. What I needed right then was some food. So what came over me was I just visualized Jesus with his hand on my backpack and went back to my chicken. And I ate my chicken, I ate all my food, I even had dessert. And then I walked back the 2 blocks and there was my backpack. And I thought, well, must have been something I ate. There's no way that anything happened. And when I got to my backpack, I heard somebody yelling. And it was a construction site about a block away on the other side. And so I ran over to the guy and he ran over to me. And he said, "Is that your backpack?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we just chased away some people about 30 minutes ago who had driven up in a pickup truck and they were ready to load it. And we chased them, we screamed and yelled and said, something just told me to turn around and see it." Now, what was that about? Human extremity is God's opportunity. Where in your life are you desperate enough, willing enough, open enough to have faith the size of a penny or a mustard seed? It can be activated by a difficult situation over which you have no control. Sometimes that's what it takes. There was sometimes what it takes is facing facts. Sometimes your penny includes looking at things exactly as they are and dealing with the facts as they are and not trying to push them away. And clearing away, because I often say love brings up whatever's in its way. Well, faith brings up whatever's in its way, and what's in its way is doubt. James Dilla Freeman once wrote, "I write on behalf of doubt for those who doubt because I am one of them." He talked about faith. He was always writing about faith because he understood the importance of not pushing away the doubt. I write on behalf of those who doubt because I am one of them. So what do you do when you have the doubts? You allow it, you clear it, you release it. You don't pretend like it's not going on. Perhaps there's something in the way between you and the answer that you're looking for. Perhaps it's something physical. Perhaps it's something in your memory. Remember my very first church, there was a man, a Japanese man who came in. He was about 70 years old. He'd seen me on a television program that was in Los Angeles. It was a Unity show called There Is a Way. And that's another story. It actually had as good ratings as the Today Show. It was very popular there. And so he had never went to the church before or after. He just came to see me, and he said that he had a specific healing need that was quite serious, and he wanted some prayer. Well, I led him through the prayers similar to what I have in the Gift of Healing CD that I've got, and we were doing the work on it. And in the middle of it, it just dawned on me that I needed to ask him a question. Now, perhaps it's because of his age and because he was Japanese, but I asked him, "Where were you during World War II?" This was like 1981. And he said, "Well, I was in Manzanar, the internment camp." And he told me this story, and you could tell that he was still very bitter about it, about how his family had been interned. They were loyal people. His father had been a very successful businessman, owned a lot of real estate. All of it was taken from him, and it was never returned after the war. And the family, well, his father ended up just being a gardener, tending other people's gardens in Beverly Hills, and that's what he did. And so he really resented this because he had to really struggle to get anywhere in his life as a result. And I said to him, I just get the feeling that if you do some forgiveness work here, that you're going to have a better experience of your healing. And so he and I sat down and did the forgiveness work. He did his journaling, he did his visualization, he did his release work. And that week, he had a complete remission. And I remember the next week he showed up with a little box of green tea, the best green tea I ever tasted in my life. And he had his healing because he was willing to face, to move through, to get to the other side of this. He didn't stay stuck in that old consciousness. What do you need to face? What is your penny? What do you need to look at in order to activate this faith? Sometimes you need to let go of your your tightness around it. Sometimes you need to let go of the feeling that you're controlling all the outcomes. You know, before we came here, I was in the middle of searching for a church, and what came to me so strongly was, don't say no to anything or anyone. Be open to everything. And so it was sowing, 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 sowing. I'm sowing, 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 sowing. Together? I'm sowing, 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 sowing. And sometimes you sow in one field and you reap in another. And so I would just, situations I would just put it out, put it out, put it out. And what came to me was, don't say no to anything. Be open to everything. And I believe it generated the energy that when Dee and I talked on the phone, I was really open. Being open, be willing to not hold things so tightly. How many of you saw the Harry Potter movies? Do you ever see those Harry Potter movies? Do you remember the good luck serum? And he won this good luck serum in some contest, and if he could just drink the good luck serum, everything for about a day or so would turn his way. Well, he had a situation that was really, really bad, and so he drank the good luck serum, and everybody wanted him to take care of the problem. He said, no, I want to go down and just hang out with Hagrid down in his hut, down by the river. It's like, no, you're not going to do that. Yes, I'm going to do that. I think that's just the right thing. And when he was down there, he saw something that gave him a clue to do something else, and then made everything turn out perfectly. And then it turned out that he hadn't even drank the good luck serum. What they'd given him was water. That the real good luck serum was still there. So it was all in his consciousness. Taking that attitude of this openness, knowing that you may sow in one field and reap in another, that you're not locked into form. My old Fuller brush manager, when I was in college and was selling brushes door to door, forgive me on this one, used to call it the what the hell attitude. He said, what you got to do is that if you've got 3 hours to sell your brushes, and you got a row of houses down one street and the 3 hours are up, don't stop. Just finish it up, because you're going to sell something to every single house there, because you don't care. You have the what the heck attitude. You have the what the hell attitude. Your attitude is, I'm open, I'm open, I'm open. And he says you could have a bucket of slops carried down the street and everybody buy it from you. So to have that attitude, open yourself up, but it means being willing to sow. Now often we take the attitude of, well, I'm not going to sow. I'm not going to do it because, if I'm going to do this, I want back from you this certain response, and I'm probably not going to get that response. But open up, because you never know. You may be sowing in one field and reaping in another. Jane Elizabeth Hart is going to be here in about a month. She's going to be talking about her spiritual power tools and her 7 steps, and she and I will be putting on a joint seminar together after the service. But something happened to her. I remember when she moved from Detroit to Kansas City to go into be a licensed Unity teacher. She was going to get her training, and she was working in an insurance office, and what came to her was, you were to hold the light for Unity Village. You need to get a job at Unity Village. And the then minister, Chris Chenoweth, said to her, well, there's no opening, it's perfect for you. It's at the clubhouse, which was down by the swimming pool, and they need a clubhouse manager. Anybody been down by the swimming pool at Unity Village? Anybody in this room? Yeah. And it's this beautiful 1921, there's a creek that actually runs through it, so it's a fresh water, constantly replenished, and there's a waterfall at one end, and this little hobbit hut. I mean, it looks like hobbits live in. It looks like a little thing in Hobbiton that was built in the 1920s. It's with trees all around it. It was so wonderful. It's just one problem with it, that the person who would work in the clubhouse got paid minimum wage. They got free rent, but Jane realized that she would have to give up her car. And her attitude was, I'm just surrendered. She wouldn't even be able to afford gasoline. She was just going to just let go. And she put herself out there, and she was willing to do it because she knew she was guided to do this thing. And they didn't give her the job. Now you think to yourself, well, isn't that a slap in the face? I mean, here she is, this incredible person, and they won't even give her a job at minimum wage where she'd have to get rid of her car? Well, when they gave her the news that she didn't get the job, they said, but you've been working on the phones a lot in this real estate office and in various other inside sales jobs. Why don't you apply for this other job in development, where she'd be working the phones, working with people who were associated with Unity in development? And so she put her name out there, and she got that job, and that was parlayed into being an outside development officer. And she got the whole West Coast. She could fly around and go to all the places all over the West Coast And it was the most fabulous job in the world. Why? Because she sowed in one field and she reaped in another. Her magic penny was to sow in something that was not related. Put your energy out there. You're in line at Dominic's and there's this person bagging your groceries. Well, I'm not going to put any energy into them. I'm in a bad mood. What are they going to do for me? No. Give your love. Show your appreciation. Show your support. Put it out there. Allow yourself, and then you will reap in another field. Lynn had that experience. She had a friend, and I've shared this before, where she had a friend who was really a close spiritual friend, and a lot of things happened, but her friend kind of went off the path a little bit and started doing things she oughtn't to be doing, and she wasn't treating Lynn very well, and Lynn really felt hurt by this. But what came to her was just love her, forgive her, give her love, whatever. 6 months later, we'd moved to a new location, and she was in a situation where she met a woman who's actually going to be here next month, by the way. She's coming with Jane Hart. She met a woman who she became prayer partners with, who became one of her closest spiritual friends, and for the last 15 years, they've been extremely close. And in deep meditation, it came to Lynn, do you know why you got this friend? Because you reaped with this other person. You sowed with this other person. You're reaping with this person. You put your energy out there. You put your love out there without attachment. You got to have that detached attitude, that letting go, and knowing that your penny may be putting energy out where it doesn't look like it's going to work out, but you got to be open anyway. I'm going to tell a story that probably is going to offend some people, but hey, at 9 o'clock they didn't bite me, so I'm going to tell it to you. You know the story. I was giving a talk. I was interviewing for a position. This was many years ago. And it was in a talk where the stage was up kind of high, and it was actually televised, and it was kind of important. And there I was, auditioning for the church, and I sat down, and the head usher handed me a note, and I read it, and it said, "Your fly is open." Now, in that moment, I had a choice. How am I going to handle this in my mind? And I thought, okay, and my prayer was, God, how are you going to turn this to good? And I turned to Lynn, I handed it to her, and I whispered, metaphysically interpret this. And she turned it over and she wrote, your soul is open and you're flying. I got the job. Now in your life, where are you willing to have that flexible attitude? Where are you willing to have that attitude where you open up to the highest good, where you're not locked in? Sometimes it takes being in a situation where you have no control. Sometimes the most incredible stories happen when people are in the most dire circumstances. There was a man named Sidney Ennis. I was an associate minister in a church about 25 years ago, and in the church newsletter they had a column by this guy, and he would always write about spiritual things, and there was such an energy and a light. And I asked people, what is with this guy? Because he always writes from such a standpoint of knowing and faith, and they said, you need to ask him his story. They didn't tell me what happened. So I asked him about it, and he told me a story. You know ALS, which Stephen Hawking has? Well, at that time, Stephen Hawking had it for 12 years, and everybody said that he was the longest surviving ALS person in history, that ALS usually takes people in 2 years. Stephen Hawking had progressively gotten worse, but he still was around after 12 years, and of course he's still alive today. Sidney Ennis, what people didn't know was that Sidney Ennis had had it for 30 years at that point, and he had been in a wheelchair. And when I met Sidney, he had a little bit of a limp, and he kind of talked. If you didn't know any better, you'd think he'd been drinking. Kind of talked a little like this, and he kind of walked a little like this, but you didn't really know what was wrong with him. But he had been in a wheelchair, was not able to move the lower part of his body. Here he was driving a normal car, living a normal life, and he kept getting better and better and better. He lived until his 90s. And what he died from was not ALS. But what happened, what his penny was he went into the Unity Minister in Menlo Park, California, and she gave him an affirmation. And he had no choice. He just started working with it. Sitting there, saying it, meditating, praying about it, visualizing. And this is what happened. Now, it doesn't mean that you get a specific result. There's no shame or harm in a soul that makes the choice to leave the planet. It's not that everybody who has a prayer is going to have a specific outcome. But in his situation, he had work to do. And he went once a month to Stanford Medical School and talked to the students there and talked to them about the consciousness, mind-body connection, and made an impact on hundreds, if not thousands, of medical students. And I met him, and he was the real deal. What is your penny? Where in your life can you exercise faith? Where can you take something simple and work with it? Maybe this penny is your penny. I always talk about my mom and my sister and how she took that affirmation, and my sister had the birth defects, worked with that for a year. She just worked with one idea. Now what we're going to do as a church community here is we're going to take our pennies. Now we're going to do a blessing, much like Charles Fillmore did when he asked, does anybody have a penny? It just came over him, and that began the ball rolling that created our wonderful world headquarters at Unity Village. So I want you to take your penny, and I want you to put it in your hand and know that you have a playful attitude, that you have a childlike faith, that your attitude is what Jesus said, becoming as a child, letting go into that sweet spot of faith. And whatever fears or doubts or anxiety we may feel, we don't push them away. We don't go into denial or pretend like they're not there. Instead, we expand beyond them. And we say, God, let an energy and a vibration enter into this penny that we're holding to remind us anytime that we find ourselves falling into a pit of doubt or despair or concern, that we have a focus, we have a sweet spot of faith. Move us and align us into that sweet spot of faith. Put us into that place where unexpected good comes, where this is how you're loving us, where the highest good for all concerned is working out, where an optimal outcome can work out. And as you hold your penny, place your blessing. Thank you, God, that whenever I look at this penny, I will be reminded of the sweet spot of faith, of the highest good for all concerned, of not my will be done, but yours, of the optimal outcome, the divine order that's working out. Expand my heart beyond any concerns or considerations I'm holding. And let me remember the mustard seed, the penny, the little bit of faith for me to exercise. Thank you, God. And so it is. Let me take a deep breath and let it out. And ask to be put in the sweet spot of faith. There's a sweet spot in a catcher's mitt, just where the ball will be perfectly received. And if we open ourselves and let go of our personal agendas and control, we can open up to the sweet spot of faith. We are open and receptive to the sweet spot of faith. God, surprise me with your goodness. Open me up to your increased possibility for good and expand me. How are you going to turn all these things to good? I am aligned with the highest good for all concerned. Move me, move my soul to that open-hearted, embracing spot of sweet faith. I don't push away doubt. I don't push away fear or anxiety. but I expand beyond it. I embrace, allow to be what seems to be a limitation, and I expand beyond it. I am aligned with the good. I'm aligned with my highest good and the highest good for all concerned. God, put me in the sweet spot of faith. By opening my heart, expanding my awareness, I am moved into that place where my needs are met. If I came in here today with a personal need, put me in the sweet spot of faith and open me up to the optimal outcomes, the best and highest for all concerned. Not just for the people I'm praying for or myself, but in alignment with a greater plan. Lifting up into a new possibility. I open up, I rest in the sweet spot of faith. God, put me in the sweet spot of faith. Put me in that place where I am open and receptive to increased good. Surprise me with your goodness. Show me a new outcome, a better way of looking at things. I release, I let go, and I am moved into the spot of sweet faith. Thank you, God, and so it is. Amen.